All right, I'm here with a different type of video. I feel like I say that every time I do a video that's not just a pickup video, but I figured I would talk about kind of the state of just game collecting in general, just some thoughts and just observations. Obviously, I think a lot of people who have been collecting for a while have noticed that things have definitely changed, maybe for the worse in a lot of ways, but I figured I'd kind of just go over some things, some trends, talk about some of this stuff. I started collecting in early 2011, so this is year 11 of collecting for me. And yes, a lot of things have definitely changed since then. Um, Prices have definitely skyrocketed in a lot of different areas. There's just a lot of kind of weird trends that have been going on. So I figured I'd just talk about that. Um, Let me know what you think about in the comments about recent developments in the game collecting stuff, everything like that, prices, whatever. Let me know in the comments what you think about that. But I figured I'd start just kind of with prices in general, because yeah, it's very obvious that things have gone up. Um, I think very clearly GameCube would be the one to keep an eye out for. And I luckily pretty much finished what I would want for my GameCube collection probably 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. It was one of the first systems I really started aiming at, finishing my collection that I wanted for, just because it's a system I grew up with. It's my favorite system, so it has a lot of great games. So that was definitely the one that I started with. And there's a few games I'd like for it, Chibi Robo, stuff like that. But for the most part, I'm done with collecting for it, uh, unless I find something cool for a good price. But the titles I want are at least finished for the most part. But yeah, the prices are insane on GameCube. There's stuff like I was shocked. I don't really look at prices too much. I'm not a value collector, so I don't really look at prices too much. But every once in a while, I'll kind of get bored, have some downtime, and I'll look through price charting and just see like what's high on these. And I was like shocked to see the game Wario World is like $100 game complete. Like what on earth? Developed by Treasure. It's a weird like beat 'em up platformer. It's not very good. So I just can't even imagine paying $100 for Wario World. Very very strange, but that's beside the point. I just noticed a lot of games are just really expensive on GameCube, like astronomically expensive. Like The Simpsons Hit and Run is like a $60 game. Just crazy stuff. I've never really seen anything like this where a somewhat modern, I mean 20-year-old, but somewhat modern system is just so expensive for whatever reason. I've never seen anything like that, and it's really strange. I'm not I'm not sure if prices are going to go back down. I don't know. Some people have been collecting a little while. Will probably remember 2015, 2016 is when there was a big NES collecting bubble, and the bubble kind of started popping. I want to quote unquote popping. We'll get back to the idea of like the bubble popping. The bubble started popping with around 2017-ish or so. It was just NES games were shooting up, going crazy. It was like the hot thing to collect. And eventually prices started going back down. Now they're kind of back up just because whether it be inflation or whatever, everything has just gone up. But it was just a weird thing where like NES stuff was big. It was big. And now I feel like everything is big. Everything is like that NES boom where like you're hard pressed, except for some certain systems to find, especially Nintendo, anything Nintendo that's still reasonably priced. I guess Wii, and I think Wii is going to be like the next system to shoot up. I mean, it's simple pattern recognition, really. N64 a couple years ago started shooting up, about that 20-year point from when the system came out. Whether it be people with nostalgia starting to get their own jobs and want to revisit that stuff, whether it just be you know there is a cool thing with it's cool to like something that's about that old, where it's like Wii is just new enough where it's like that's just out of style, but now once it hits retro or whatever, then it's going to be cool. And you're seeing that with GameCube now, and I think Wii is logically the next step for that. But Wii is still reasonable. I mean, there are some higher end games starting to get up there in price, and I would be interested to see where Wii goes. It's almost there's a lot of obviously shovelware. There's a lot of junk, and there's a lot of Nintendo first party stuff that I think is pretty well liked, pretty well beloved. But there's also this whole layer, and why the reason I like the Wii so much is there's this whole layer of very niche games, mostly niche like Japanese games that didn't get very big print runs. Some very strange. I think of like Fragile Dreams, Farewell Ruin to the Moon. I think of like Arc Rise Fantasia. They're kind of these like middle, not AAA, not indie, kind of middle of the road Japanese niche titles that are starting to climb up in value, and I think like that's where a lot of the collecting is going to be. And once again, Wii is one of the first systems I also targeted, so I've pretty much finished my collection there as well. So I'm kind of just sitting observing, being like, hey, I'm all good. But I would say Wii's the next place to go for anything like that. But I don't even know what topic I was on at this point. This is just going to be a ramble video. I figured I would just throw this out here. Anyone who would care, anyone who listened, but yeah, prices are just crazy. You're hard pressed to find anything that's cheap. I mean, if you've never watched the channel before, I go to garage sales, I go to flea markets and try to make bundle deals and get games for cheap. Buy a lot of low end games for cheap and then trade them up to good stuff. That's how I get it. So I really and truly don't spend on my retro collection, at least. I don't spend much actual money. On modern stuff, I spend more money, but most of my retro collection is bought through selling on eBay and stuff like that. And that's the only way, I can justify it and that it's affordable. Is like, oh, this great game here, this game that's usually, I don't know, $50, I got it for $1. Or this game that's $300, well, I spent, $10 on a bunch of games and traded them up. And, those aren't exact examples, but you know what I mean. And I'm a little worried, like, there's going to be some younger people who are just completely locked out of it. I started collecting when I was 13, and I, had a game store right down the street I could walk to, and I was buying NES games and for like $1 each, $2.50 each. I remember buying GameCube games. No one wanted GameCube games. This was 2011. No one wanted GameCube games. I remember buying Metroid Prime for $5. Wind Waker for $10, Mario Sunshine for $10, and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door for $10 back in the day. So that'll show you how much no one wanted GameCube games. But that it was an affordable thing. I was a kid. I didn't have a job, and I was just kind of racking up games, heading over to the place, heading over to the game store, picking up a game, going into it. And now I feel like there's other great options to play games. Retro games, but if you want to get into collecting, it's very cost prohibitive, and I think that's a shame, because you're going to definitely get younger people who are just not able to get into it. And when you don't have younger people getting into it and you have older people getting out of it, then you start obviously losing the people who are part of the collecting hobby, and then prices are going to start going down. So if we talk about like the idea of the bubble, I'm not an economy man, but you talk about the idea of the bubble. People have been saying the bubble's going to pop for a long time now. A lot of really smart collectors, a lot of people have really been saying that the bubble's going to pop like any second now. And there's definitely ebbs and flows. I think it has its peaks. Obviously 2020 COVID times, collecting was crazy, and it's kind of simmered down. You'll have peaks like when they threaten to take down the PlayStation Store, and you'll have a peak where, PS3 games will spike, but they'll go back down. I don't think that we're going to be in a place anytime soon, at least, where games are essentially worthless. And I don't say this as like, oh God, no, not my collection. It's a fun hobby for me. I don't take it as a value thing. If my collection was worth nothing tomorrow, I would be like, oh crap. But I also would be like, yeah, it's still fun. Still have fun doing it. I've been doing it since it wasn't a value thing. I'm going to continue doing it long into the future. But I don't think that there is I don't think there's a point where we're going to be sitting here and all the games are all of a sudden worthless. I think there will be a point where certain games start going down. Like, I think of Atari. Atari stuff was pretty big with collecting, mostly before I was collecting, but from my understanding, like late 90s, the aughts, we'll say, were big on Atari collecting, and then the people who had done Atari collecting, they were kind of done. No one, you know, I don't collect Atari stuff. I think a lot of people don't want to go that old. Are we going to start seeing that for NES and Super Nintendo? Or are people going to be like, oh, that's a little too old for me. I don't want to play that. Are we going to start seeing people be like, I can't, we're on PlayStation 7. I don't know how I can play a 3D game, a PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 game. This is so, like dated. So I think we'll see a lot of that where like libraries become less appealing over time. I think the reason going back to GameCube that's so appealing is that those games hold up really well, especially the Nintendo first party. You play something like Mario Sunshine, you play something like Wind Waker, and they still hold up. Those games are almost 20 years old and they still hold up really, really well. But even then, I think that we'll get to a point, like I said, where these libraries may not be as appealing and there's less demand for them. But I don't think we'll ever get to a point where, we're offloading this stuff for $1 each. And I'm not even trying to say that as a cope or whatever. I don't care about value too much, but I think value to me is a fun part of it. It is fun to be able to go to a garage sale and buy. I think like, oh man, this person priced this game at $5. It's worth, $100 or something. That's fun to me. I don't sit here being like, oh yes, my collection here. It's just, and I know people that do that, and I don't, no offense, but I think that's kind of obnoxious. I just do it. I really do it for the fun of it. But so yeah, I wanted to cover the bubble idea. Grading games. I think this is another one, and I think there's a lot of vitriol around the idea of grading games. And I think a lot of it's kind of unfounded. I don't really care what people do with their money. If you want to get your your game encased in a plastic case, by all means. I find it interesting actually. Because there's people like, oh, this person got Mario 3 graded and now it's just cased in plastic forever. It won't be played. And it's like, there's other ways to play Mario 3. You can play it on the Switch. You can play it on the Wii or the Wii U. You can play it on, God, anything. There's 10 trillion NES cartridges of it that are loose that you can play it on right now. Like, graded and sealed game collecting is definitely like this weird thing where people get really mad about it, but I really find it to be a non-issue. Like, it's a different form of collecting, I think, to me. And I think stuff like that's really cool. I think the idea, like, this is a 30-year-old copy of Super Mario Brothers 3, for example. It's still sealed. That plastic seal is still intact. Everything is still in there as it would have been 30 years ago. This, of course, I mean, I know that the sealed market's weird. There's all kinds of allegations around it. I'm not going to go into that. Some of this stuff seems a little bit sketchy with some of these sites, but they're getting better. They're releasing like pop reports and stuff, so that's good. But I'm not going into that. I just think the idea of sealed and getting games graded, people really get mad about it, and I don't really get why. I feel like you could, focus your anger somewhere else, because if you're going to get mad at someone spending their own money protecting, and that's the way I see it. There's some stuff I'd actually like to get graded. I have some valuable stuff that is sealed, and this stuff says climbing, and I kind of am like, oh, I'd maybe like to get this in a case, that way, the seal won't tear or this or that. So there is some, valuable stuff I'd like to get graded. Right now, I'm not really in the market for it because it's just so expensive, and there's such a rush to it. I'm not in any rush, so it's like I'll just wait until that's kind of settled down. But I think some people get crazy about it. There's some people on YouTube who are really into it, and I find it interesting, but there's people who will like get anything that's sealed graded, like just the crappiest games that are sealed graded. And it's like, you're paying like $100 to get this sealed, and you got like Shrek on the Xbox sealed graded. It's like, okay, it's kind of odd, but I see it like comic book collecting is how I see it. I see it as in like, this is the first comic with Wolverine or say in it, this is, graded, and that's a cool collector's piece. Having something like that, I don't see as any really much different than saying this is a sealed copy of the Legend of Zelda original. That's cool. And I don't, I don't get why people get so mad. There's other places to play Zelda. Having one encased in in a plastic case that's sealed is not gonna keep you from being able to play that game. So yeah, that's my thoughts on graded stuff. I find it interesting. I would there's some things I'd like to get graded, but mostly just because of safety things. I'm not really in it to be selling. I'm not really in it to be, um, you know, I just really would like to just protect the stuff for the most part and get it graded that way. Um, but it's definitely an interesting market. That I mean, it's just popped up, and a lot of people are like currently buying a bunch of stuff to get sealed, buying sealed stuff, like new stuff, like stuff that's you could still buy in stores. People are buying those and then getting them graded immediately and sitting on them. And I don't think that's a great idea. Don't take my financial advice. I'm not, any kind of financial advisor. This is just my opinion. I think a lot going back to other forms of collecting. There was a Star Wars toy line called Power of the Force 2. In the 90s, and what had happened is people had seen that the original like Kenner line of Star Wars toys had become pretty valuable. They're from the late 70s, early 80s. They'd become pretty valuable, so a lot of people saw this new Star Wars line and were buying them up and keeping them sealed and sitting on them as a way to speculate. And what ended up happening is that so many people did this that they're kind of worthless. Having them sealed doesn't really do you much good. They're kind of worthless. And I'm not any kind of toy expert, so anyone in the comments who knows more about toy stuff could let me know how accurate that story is. But that's my understanding of the story. Something similar also happened with comic books, where they were making like all these special edition Marvel comics in the 90s, and people were buying them, after seeing Superman comics and Spider-Man comics selling for a bunch of money. And when a bunch of people get in on this and speculate on it, then everyone's in on it. Everyone's doing it. Everyone has a sealed copy. It's not special anymore. The reason why stuff like, it's unfathomable to me that Super Mario 64 copy sold a few months ago for $1.5 million. That's unfathomable to me, but there can't be very many sealed copies of Super Mario 64. Because people back then weren't thinking about it. They're throwing. I mean, that's the era where most people threw their cardboard box for the game away. There's just not a collecting mentality for most people. There may have been some luminaries of their time selling that or keeping that Mario 64 to be sealed, but for the most part, most people are playing them. So there's not very many of them. But when I see, like, I've seen so many people bought a ton of like 20 copies of Super Mario 3D All Stars. Which is a game that they, stopped selling. Nintendo actually pulled for their whatever arbitrary reason they came up with. But you can still find that game in stores. I've seen it in stores recently. And there's people who went and spent, over $1,000 buying a bunch of copies of that game to sit on. And I can't see how that would be a good investment. Really and truly. I just can't see how that would be a good investment in any way. And that's just me. If you want to do it and you have some great plan and it works out for you, that's great. But from my opinion, I just find that completely ridiculous. And I don't understand why a lot of people do stuff like this. I just, I feel like if a lot of people are going and buying Pokemon games on the Switch sealed, or they're buying, Mario games on the Switch sealed or whatever. If a lot of people are going out and doing that, then that's just more copies out there of people doing that. And I just don't see how that's going to be sustainable as a collecting thing. But that was my final thought on that. I think I'm going to end it here. Let me know what you think in the comments below of the current state of game collecting, or just in general on collecting, sealed collecting. Let me know how I'm wrong. Let me know how I'm right, whatever. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Follow me on Twitter at ObjoGaming. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, I'd like to thank you for watching.